Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cardvine. I am Carol Zangari, and I am Professor of Speech-Language Pathology at Nova Southeastern University, and recently have been working with the UM-NSU Card Center, specifically the NSU satellite. So we're going to be talking today about selecting AAC apps for children with autism spectrum disorders. You are welcome to use the chat box for any questions that you have, and I will try to leave some time at the end to address those. Okay, before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. I first want to acknowledge the contribution of my late colleague, Dr. Robin Parker. She and I developed most of this presentation together and then presented it at the ASHA conference last fall. And I did parts of it also with Charlene Cullen and Amanda Hartman at the Inclusive Learning Technology Conference in Gold Coast, Australia. I have no financial disclosures that are relevant to this presentation, but I did want to share that I am the author of a non-revenue producing educational website called Practical AAC and a board member for FAST, and I'll be mentioning that at a later point in the presentation. So today what we're going to do in the short time that we have together is we're going to talk a bit about the concept of the best AAC app. We will talk a bit about what the process should look like for app selection, and we will look at a whole bunch of different AAC apps that range in complexity from super simple to very complex and will allow communication at the level of generative language and grammatically correct utterances. All right, so because I'm talking about a lot of apps today, I did want to mention that this doesn't imply any endorsement either by myself or by CARD as an organization. And secondly, I wanted you guys to be aware that this is a sampling of AAC apps. It is not meant to be a comprehensive review of all the AAC apps that are out there. Just some examples to illustrate the key features and concepts. Okay. Well, the impetus for this presentation came a couple years back when Robin Parker and I, who worked together on many projects for many years, began getting lots and lots of calls from professionals and families alike who are really interested in using AAC apps with kids that have autism. And as we spoke to them, talked about the way that they were going about this, it became very clear to us that we needed to maybe provide some guidance, because what was happening was that people who typically use very systematic processes for other things and rely on evidence for other things were not using that same kind of clinical reasoning and systematic decision making when it came to AAC apps. Now, traditionally, in the field of AAC, a speech-language pathologist has had to be involved in order to do the assessment and get funding for a particular AAC device. With the launch of so many mobile apps, that no longer was the case, that people could go directly to the App Store, whether it was a program, an individual clinician, or even a family member, and just purchase whatever app they chose to purchase. And that was happening. Now, there's nothing terribly wrong about that for some kids, but for other kids, it led to a poor fit. So my analogy here is of reading glasses. I'm of an age where many of my friends are needing to use reading glasses, and some of them do perfectly well with reading glasses that they purchase at the drugstore. They can go on, try a couple pair on, and find one that works fairly well for them. Others, however, have more complex needs or rely on their reading glasses extensively. And for those individuals, they need to really go to the optometrist to get a checkup and have an individualized prescription so that they get something specific to their individual needs. The same is true for many folks with autism spectrum disorders. You guys all know that these kids are so different one from another. If that's the case, then it makes sense that we'd want to do an individualized assessment to help find the best AAC app for the needs of that individual child. Okay, well, I guess you'd have to be a Luddite or living under a rock somewhere not to have been aware of the veritable explosion of mobile technologies and apps, both for the Android platform and for the Apple iOS devices. And that kind of has made our job a little tougher because there are so many of them. Originally, we were only finding AAC apps for the iOS devices. In the past maybe 18 months, there have been many more for Android devices as well. And we will look at some that fit with both platforms. But it was a lot easier to help people make these decisions when there were fewer out there. Now there are so many that we really need not just a process, but also some resources for locating, how we find out about all of these different AAC apps. All right, now if we think about the landscape of AAC apps that are out there and have been out there in the last maybe 3 years, they fall into different categories. There are several that will allow an individual to speak in grammatically correct utterances, right? Be able to change the endings of words, be able to conjugate a verb, use different verb tenses, that sort of thing. And you may be working with kids where, that might not be what they're focusing on now, but you might see that they have potential for that in the future. So you'd need to be aware of those. The vast majority fall into the category of apps that are more restrictive in terms of expressive communication. They allow you to do things like make requests, retell things. And there are several of those, actually quite a few of those, that allow you to fulfill basic communicative functions, things primarily related to behavior regulation. And we will look at many of those. But there are also AAC apps in these other categories. There are a few now that will help us with assessment, that will help actually do some teaching in the area of language and communication. There are many that help build independence, and there are also some that will allow you to make AAC materials and then print them, much like you're used to doing with BoardMaker. So we have very limited time today, so what we're going to focus on are these first two categories. All right, so AAC app selection really fits in the larger context of AAC evaluation, right? And we said before that these kids they share sort of the characteristic of being on the autism spectrum, but beyond that, they are so different from one another that they really do need a good AAC evaluation to help ensure a fit between the tools and the strategies that we find will be most effective for them and the things that are out there. So if we think about AAC evaluations as sort of, our starting point, then within that, we're looking at technology, right? Not every kid, will benefit from and needs technology, but many will. So we're thinking about technology. And then within that, kind of drilling down even a little bit more narrowly, we are looking specifically at AAC apps because we've determined that a mobile device is the way to go for this particular individual. So that's really the context for our discussion this morning. All right, now I want to make an analogy, right? At one time or another, all of us have been involved in, picking a car. So let's think about some of the similarities between how we approach that and what I'm going to advocate for in terms of app selection, right? We've all gone car shopping, right? And when you go car shopping, yeah, you do some test driving, but before you even get to test driving them, you kind of narrow down what you're looking for, right? You don't go test drive every single car that's out there. So you think about, well, what's important to me in selecting a vehicle? Am I looking for, a new or a used car, a traditional combustion engine? Do I want a hybrid, an electric car, right? That one thing there may completely steer me in one direction or another and help me kind of hone down the number of cars that I'm thinking about. But there's all kinds of other things I'm thinking about in car shopping. A sports car, a sedan, how many doors? Do I, want a foreign car or American, right? Four-wheel drive if you live in a place where it's very hilly or you get lots of snow. That may be essential. So you have these things in mind that maybe are on your must-have list, but then you also have things that, yeah, I don't know, they're maybe on your wish list. So, yeah, if it would be great if I could have seat warmers because I live in Minnesota where it's freezing, right? Or, oh no, I'm always, drinking my latte and I'm drinking water at the same time when I'm driving. So I want lots of cup holders, or I want a rear view camera, or I love satellite radio. So you have these things that you'd really like, but they're not important, they're not deal breakers for you, right? They're not important enough to make or break your decision. The things on the other side, however, may be, all right? So it's going to be the same sort of thing with AAC device selection, right? You're going to be, doing the kind of evaluation that enables you to determine what's on your must-have list for this child and then what's on your wish list. All right, so there's lots of different features that we need to be thinking about during this process. Symbols and how core words are represented. How they organize the vocabulary. We all know that kids with autism, one of the biggest problems they have is how language gets organized in their brains and how we can help build that fluency so they can retrieve it very quickly. The different voices that are on there. If you're working with a child and you love this app, but it only comes in an adult voice, right, that may really be a deal breaker for you. So we're thinking about these apps and evaluating them relative to these different features that they present. And we'll be talking more about those in particular. But the process I wanted to highlight at this point is called feature matching. And feature matching is a process in which we look at the individual communicator and think of what they can do, right, as they present now, right? What are their abilities and what are their strengths? And then kind of try and peek as well as we can into the future and think to ourselves, well, what are their needs now and what are their needs in the future, right? And that helps us come up with our wish list and our must-have list. And what we try to do then is match the features of specific AAC components to the strengths and the needs that these communicators have right now, and then looking a bit into the future. And that future piece is really important. And I was saying to somebody yesterday, I kind of think of it often like shoe shopping for children, right? So when you're buying shoes for a 4-year-old, you know they're going to grow, right? So you want to buy them with a little bit of growing room, right? But what happens if you buy them with too much growing room? They're tripping, they're falling, you're ending up in the emergency room getting stitches and all that. So we're looking for that sweet spot, right, that helps us address their needs right now, but then also allows us to give them some growing room so that we're not replacing this with a new app in 8 months, in 18 months. Okay. So feature matching, a little bit more about it. It's been the gold standard for more than 2 decades. So this is nothing new. SLPs who have been involved in AAC know this process well. So if you are an SLP, it's familiar to you. If you're working with SLPs as a family member, as an educator, as a support coordinator, as another kind of clinician, right? Indicate to them, if you're getting their help with this, that you really are interested in an AAC evaluation for a mobile device and an AAC app that makes use of the feature match process. So generally, this is led by an SLP with lots of input from the team, right? Family and other team members, and the SLP generally leads it because most of the decisions that are made are rooted in language and communication, and there are language specialists. So it's it helps us with predictive assessment, right? There's components that allow us to look at how language should be represented and what kinds of symbols are best for any individual child, how that vocabulary should be organized, and whether it might be better for this kid to have word-based vocabulary so he can sequence things into sentences, or whether he's going to need maybe more pre-stored utterances. He's going to need whole sentences put together for him. It gives us information on how much vocabulary is needed and what kind, and all kinds of other things. And then one of the final steps in the feature match process is a period of trial use, where we trial different devices, or in this case we're talking about apps. We trial those different apps, and what that means is we get them set up on the mobile device, we customize them for that user, provide some training, and then that individual uses it for a period of time. And then we repeat that with others that have made our short list. Remember, we don't test drive every single car out there, right? We use our feature list to narrow that down. But once we've done our test driving, we've got some that have made our short list, right? So what we're doing now is really taking it out for a more extended test drive, if you will. And at the end of that process, then we make our final selection. Now, depending on where your funding source is coming from, they may tell you how long that period of trial use may be. A lot of funders are saying, 30 days. But we won't really focus on that at this point because many of the funders are just now figuring out how they are going to accommodate mobile devices in AAC apps. When what they're really used to is the more traditional AAC devices. It's thrown everybody into a bit of a tither, and they're all still kind of figuring that out. All right, so feature matching is key, right? Because how else are you going to know what to look for, right? If you're a believer that all these kids are unique, they are all individuals, and they have very different kinds of characteristics, right, then it will make sense to you that we have to use a process that respects their individual differences. And the best practice approach to this, right, is this feature match process. All right, so what should we be thinking about a little bit more specifically in AAC app selection? What are those features? Let's talk about those. All right, so one of them is visual representation. How am I going to symbolize language to the user? Now, depending on the age and ability level of the child, they may or may not be a reader. So if their reading skills, if their reading with comprehension is insufficient, we're looking at picture symbols for the most part. And we have tons of options. Some children do fine with any of them. Many children, however, do much better with some than with others. And when we just go to the App Store and pick an app because somebody else we know uses it, or a clinician we know really likes it, or I already know this one, we're kind of taking a shot in the dark. We really don't know whether the symbols in that app are a good fit for any individual learner. So part of our assessment looks at the specific, visual representations and symbols for each particular learner so that we can match that to the different apps that are out there. Another thing is vocabulary, right? There are many ways that SLPs think about vocabulary in the app selection process. Probably the biggest is how much vocabulary, how many words do kids need? And what I have seen is that we vastly underestimate what kids need. Now let's say I have, maybe a 10-year-old who has autism and apraxia and needs an AAC app. And, I'm looking through his reports and the assessments, and somewhere it tells me, this 10-year-old is functioning in terms of communication and language at the 2-year level, right? Well, some people may think of that and say, wow, that's really impaired, right? And in some ways, I'm not going to disagree with you. But if you look at it from a language perspective, right, and you think about what vocabulary a 2-year-old knows, right, by the time they're 2, kids have 200-300 words in their vocabulary, right? So that would be just a minimum. And we don't want to only give kids they already know, right? What would be the point of that? That would automatically put a ceiling on their language development, right? Imagine if you were working with a 2-year-old speaking child, right? And that kid can say 200 or 300 words, right? Now you're talking to him. Would you limit yourself to the 200 to 300 words that kid can say? Of course not. That's ridiculous, right? You give them access to all kinds of other words, right? And the same concept applies here in AAC. So remember, we're giving them the words they will know now, but also the ones they're going to know in these next steps. We're also thinking about what kind of vocabulary. And many of the apps that are out there are noun heavy, right? They have the pictures and words for food items and toys and people, and that's not bad. But you know what? Most of what we say falls into other categories, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You might need the app to speak other languages. Here in South Florida in particular, we have many families that speak, the kids speak one language at home and a different language at school, or one language with parents and another language with grandparents. So we may want to be thinking about that in our feature list. And then how much is already preset or pre-programmed? There can be some real advantages to that. All right, so core vocabulary. Well, one huge change in the field of AAC in the past 5 years is that we've become much more cognizant of the fact that core vocabulary is the way to go for almost all communicators. Not all, but almost all. And so what we are finding is these AAC apps that are out there, many of them, don't necessarily address core vocabulary well. So if core vocabulary is new to you, what it refers to is that word set. It's approximately a 300 to 500 word list that all of us use frequently throughout the day, no matter how old we are, no matter where we live, no matter what we do, right? If we, in the studies where people have followed other folks around and recorded what they have said, right, we have a lot of consistency in terms of the words that are spoken. And about the research is anywhere between 75 and 85% of the words we use fall into this category of core vocabulary. Pronouns, basic verbs, modifiers, prepositions, all those kinds of things. Right? So if we know that that's going to comprise most of what people say, then we want to make sure that we're at least evaluating the app relative to how it addresses core vocabulary. Some apps do it very, very well. Others don't do it at all. So we need to be thinking about that. All right, how's that vocabulary organized? Now, as we said, all of these kids are different, and so we need to be thinking about what is best. Now, you might be more familiar with the traditional grid type display, that one on the left-hand side in the middle there, and that's very effective for some kids, but not for all, right? And so our assessment will help us identify how vocabulary should be organized to maximize the communication learning for your individual child. Lots of options there. Now, the other thing to be thinking about for some of your kids is that they might need alternative access. So, for kids who only have autism, this probably is not an issue, right? But sometimes you're getting kids who have autism and cerebral palsy, right? Or a young lady with Rett syndrome. And so you may need them to operate their mobile devices with switches or with eye gaze. Excuse me, that is these devices are perfectly capable of doing that, but you have to know which platform and which apps if alternative access is important to you. So you need to know that going into the scenario. Voices, right? There are lots of different options, and some of them are digitized speech, meaning that we record our own speech. Well, that can be a blessing and a curse. The good thing about recorded speech is that it's very naturalistic. So you have that normal sounding voice, a nice rhythm and intonation and inflection, right? You can do it in any language. But the downside is now I've limited my communicator to only those things that other people thought up in advance and recorded in there, right? So you've automatically put a ceiling on what they can say, right? Only those things you predict. And you know these kids surprise us every week, right? They do something we never would have expected or predicted that they could do. So the other kind of speech is when the algorithm in the electronics puts it together, so synthetic speech. And that's not as natural sounding, but they are getting better and better. So you want to think about what the quality of speech is, the type of speech, the age, the gender, the accent, other languages, and whether they come standard with that particular app or whether it is something that you'd have to purchase at additional cost. So one of the things, there are a couple of things that really add to the cost of these apps for app developers, and one of them is that they have to purchase the different voices that are in their apps. And so it's something for you to be thinking about. Another thing is customization. To what extent can you customize it? Can you personalize it? So, just like we would, with anything else in AAC, we start, with how it ships from the factory, right? But that's only going to take us so far. We need to be able to customize it and personalize it for that individual so it reflects their life. And sometimes with some apps it's easier than with others. Some apps don't let you do very much personalization at all. Others do, but it's very challenging to do it. Others do, and it's pretty simple to do it. So it's something to be thinking about in terms of the features. Now there's other kinds of features that we think about as well. Word prediction. So if you have somebody who is using some spelling with a keyboard page, let's say, will they benefit from word prediction so that might cut down on the number of keystrokes? Are multiple users going to use this app? Let's say you are, in a preview and demonstration center, or you're doing this for a clinic program, and you want to be able to use it for assessments. Can you set it up with different profiles and multiple users? What about the backup? Right? So, if I've done all this programming, how easy is it for me to upload a backup so that if things crash, which happens from time to time, anytime we're involved with technology, we have to kind of plan for that. But, if there's an easy way for me to back that up so that I can restore it, after that has occurred. So thinking about all kinds of different features. What kinds of AAC are they already using? So maybe they are already using a Dynavox product and they want to transition from the larger dedicated device like the Dynavox VMAX, right, with Gateway, to a mobile device. Well, that has some implications on our app selection, doesn't it? We might want to at least try in our feature match device trials the app that has Gateway for the iPad. Okay? You might look at the classroom and say, okay, they're not really using a specific AAC device now, but if I look at this classroom, it is peppered with visual supports using PCS. Right? They have been using those very effectively for a couple of years, and the child already knows what those symbols mean. So again, that may, be something you want to consider for, in the app selection process. Okay. All right. So as I said, AAC app selection has to be taken in the context, right? This larger process of AAC evaluation. We're going to try not to buy the readers from the drugstore, but instead look at each child as an individual and think about what is unique to them and how does that impact our decision, right? But no matter how many times I say that, no matter how many presentations we give on this, and no matter how many times you say this to the people with whom you work, they're still going to come back to you and say, psst, I know what you mean, but what's the best AAC app for kids with autism, right? So it's a frustrating answer, but it depends, right? We have to keep preaching that it is not a one-size-fits-all situation. It all depends on what the learner needs. All right, so we're going to go from car shopping to shoe shopping. Here's another analogy I have found really helpful, right? So think about this. You've just been given an unlimited budget to go out and buy yourself a pair of shoes, and you're going to buy the ultimate pair of shoes, the shoes you have been dying to have. Right? So maybe you're a shoe person or maybe you're not, but you're buying the best shoes that money will buy, but one pair. Okay? So everybody have a pair of shoes in mind? Now imagine yourself wearing those shoes, right? How much would you like those shoes if you wore them out to a fancy nightclub on South Beach? They still your favorite shoes? Maybe yes, maybe no. Now what if you're wearing those shoes to a job interview? How are they holding up for you? Do you still love them? Now what if we're going to take a walk on the beach? Are they still your favorites? You want to take them back? What if we're going, on a hike? So you see where I'm going with this, right? You can't make that decision of what the best AAC app is out of a context. You have to know what the purpose is, what I want this app to be able to do, how I am going to expect someone to use it, right? Because those stilettos that might get you all the looks at the nightclub are going to get you a very different kind of look at a job interview, right? And are going to cause you to break your ankle if you try to go hiking with them, right? So don't fall into the trap of giving a single answer, right, to that question of what's the best AAC app for kids with autism. To shorten it, we use this process. When you're involved in app selection, before you make that decision, take a gulp, right? And let's look at what that stands for. So the A in a gulp stands for ask. What's the context? What is it that I want this person to be able to do with this particular app? Somebody who needs it at the very basic level, and for the next 18 months, I predict that really all they're going to be focusing on is choice making and making requests, right? And that's pretty much where I see them in the next 18 months, right? That's a very different kind of app than an app for a child where I could see them making simple sentences that go beyond requesting, right? That go to maybe answering a question in circle time or when mom and dad are reading stories with them at night. Those are two very different kinds of needs, and that has implications in terms of how we figure out which apps to try out with them. All right, so there are some resources that might help you in doing this. This one I learned of from Charlene Cullen, an Australian SLP. I think it was developed by Janelle Sampson, another wonderful SLP, both Australian. And she has a little bit of a flow chart that will help with that. The G in Take a Gulp is getting a comprehensive list of what apps are available. And I see it kind of messed up my screen there when it converted it for Adobe Connect. But the whole idea is that in order for us to make a good decision, we have to know what our options are, right? We've got to know what's available. So a couple of resources for that. You can do it online with a product called AAC Apps Assistant. And that's from a company called AAC Tech Connect. And they have a free trial. I've given you a shortened URL there, but you can Google them as well. And what you do is identify the kinds of features that you are interested in, and it allows you to do some comparison shopping. And you can't read the specifics of that screenshot there, but I think you get the general idea. Just like, if you're going to Best Buys to figure out what kind of laptop you want, you can compare different laptops, right? This allows you to do that. And it's a subscription service, but there's a free trial you can use. There is also a very nice app called the AAC Ferret, and that's an app for selecting AAC apps. That was developed in Australia by a company called Spectronics. And it's a fantastic app that will allow you to search for different apps based on features. And I want to say they have a much more comprehensive inclusion of different AAC apps than the one from AAC Tech Connect. Deb McBride, who runs AAC Tech Connect, kind of pre-screens those based on her criteria, whereas AAC Ferret is much more broad-ranging. Now, another real go-to resource for finding out what's out there is another Australian SLP, Jane Farrell. So Jane Farrell has a phenomenal website, and one of the things that she has is app lists that are broken down into different categories. So those that use picture symbols, those that have both picture symbols and printed words with them, and those that are text only, right? And then separate from that, she also has a list of apps, AAC and otherwise, that are switch accessible, right? So if you're working with girls that have Rett syndrome, if you're working with folks that have autism and physical disabilities, that's something to watch for. So definitely check out those resources to familiarize yourself with what AAC apps are available. These are just kind of some views from the presentation Charlene Cullen and Amanda Hartman and I did in Australia earlier this spring, but it talks specifically about the AAC Ferret app, and it gives you very comprehensive descriptions of AAC apps that are out there that go beyond what's in the App Store. The App Store is okay, but it's not very good for searching, and its description is biased by the people that develop them. But the thing that we most love about the AAC Ferret is its capacity to do searching. And not only can you search, but then you can export your results from your searches into a report that you can send to people by email or print out or that kind of thing. So really, really helpful and very reasonably priced as well. All right. So we've gotten the A, we've gotten the G. The U stands for that feature match process. We want to use that for goodness of fit, right? There are some great apps out there. There's some apps that are really limited, right? It doesn't matter as long as it's a good fit between what your communicator needs it to do and what that app offers in terms of its setup. All right, so there are different checklists and rubrics that are out there. There's a terrific one that Jessica Gosnell did when she was at Boston Children's Hospital. And all of these are searchable. I have links to them on the Practical AAC blog if anybody is interested, but I'm sure you can find them even quicker by Googling them. They're a terrific one by Kelly Fonner and Scott Marfilius that go beyond the communication aspect, but also look at the literacy and other physical aspects of these apps. Katie Lyon, another SLP from Australia, has done a terrific one that's very simple. She did that, I think, as part of her work with Scope Victoria. And then Robin Parker and I had done one that looked specifically at the language organization and the language features of AAC apps. Where the other ones are much more broad-based, we're looking in this rubric just at the language characteristics of each individual app. All right, the L is to look at app reviews, right? Try to get a sense of what others think to help you narrow down your options. So you might look at sites like the App Academy or the Spectronics blog. Yap Guru is run by SLPs, and they post a lot of app reviews, and some of them are on AAC. Tech and Special Ed publishes app reviews for lots of things as well, including AAC apps. So there are a growing number of places that do AAC app reviews. Take a look at those. And the P is for play, right? See if you can get a version to explore before you decide. Obviously, if you're doing the full feature matching process, you're doing that period of trial use. But before you even decide what might go on your short list, you might want to try it out for yourself. You may want to play around with it. Okay, so where are you going to get those apps? Well, maybe you have an unlimited budget, but if you live in the real world with me and my friends, you don't. So I want to let you know that some of these apps have free or light versions that you can get, and they are great for exploring. They might, they're not going to work most likely for your client for their full communication, but they certainly can be used in other ways to help with the decision-making process. Schools, universities might have them, and for example, we have a AAC lab here, and we'd be happy to have folks from the community come and visit with us and play around with some of our iPads in our lab. And then also, if you're not already aware of it, FAST, the Florida Alliance for Assistive Services and Technology, has regional demonstration centers all around the state, and they all have iPads, and all the iPads have AAC apps, and you can check those out. So find out which one is in your area and make arrangements to visit them, get trained on those apps, and then, borrow them to play around with them. And then last but not least, don't be shy about contacting the app developer. Sometimes they can give you other sources for finding out where to get their apps. All right, so we've talked a lot about them. Let's look at some. All right, so first we're going to look at some that are text-to-speech apps. And what I mean by that is you're going to type in and it will say what you've typed in. And there are many of these. I'm just going to give you, some screenshots of a couple of them. I think most of us are working with pre-literate individuals or folks who read but not with great comprehension and spell, but they might not spell with communicative intent or enough fluency for this to make sense for them for their expressive communication tool. So we won't spend a lot of time on them, but there are some really great, robust ones. So some of the ones that fall into that category would be verbally, and you can see that this has an alphabet, QWERTY alphabet board at the bottom, and then some core words at the top. It also uses word prediction. And then predictable, the same kind of thing. Many of these will allow you to change the order of the alphabet and the keyboard. Some kids do better in alphabetical order as opposed to QWERTY order. Another thing about predictable is that somebody could also use their finger or stylus to write on the mobile tablet, and it will pick it up that way as well. Just some other ones. Rocket Keys is one with a lot of flexibility with keyboard, a great option for folks with motor difficulties, and Proloquo for text. You probably know Proloquo to go, but one of their more recent apps is for people who use writing and spelling to communicate. All right, so now let's talk about some that allow us to have both pictures, picture symbols, and text. And so I'm using a vase as one example, but there are many of them. I'm going to show you first, some that are best for choice making, participation, and here are a couple of them. You can see kind of what I mean as I show you some of these, that they tend to be noun heavy. So some of these come with a couple, could be dozens, actually could be up to hundreds of pictures already in there or on their website that you can download into your app. But a lot of them require you to find those pictures or take those pictures and import them. And that can be fine too. That can be perfectly acceptable and appropriate for your client. It really, as I said, just depends on what their needs are. Okay, another one that is used very often for beginning communicators who need pictures and text is tap speak button, right? So how many of you are familiar with the Big Mac, right? Probably everybody who's listening to this recording or here with us today. So tap speak button is, one way to kind of put the Big Mac on a mobile device. So you can import a symbol, like we see here, a PCS symbol. You can import a photograph. You could import any kind of image that you find or that you upload, and make that recording, and it will only ever say one thing. Now, you can set them up in lots of different ways. So if you can see over here on the left, there are different options. So now I'm showing you the one for hug, right? When I'm done with that, I can go to a different one. So unlike the regular tangible Big Mac, right, this you can pre-record in advance and have it set up for a whole variety of situations. So that could be really functional, right? And if you have somebody who's already using a symbol set or system for other reasons, you can import those symbols as well. All right, tap sequence is another one that's often used with beginning communicators. So you may be familiar with sequenced communicators like the step-by-step, and this is that on the mobile device. So the idea here is that you record a sequence, and each time they touch the screen, it will play another part of that sequence. So on the left there, that's programmed to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And every time they touch it, another piece of the song comes out. We could use that for retelling stories, for delivering personal narratives. Here's what I did over the weekend so that the teacher knows after they go back to school, or here's what I did in school so parents know what you did in school. And how many parents are just craving that information. And all the kid has to do is keep touching it, right, in order to tell the next part of what happened in school that day. All right, I think everybody listening is probably also familiar with PECS. PECS Phase 3 is an app frequently used with beginning communicators, and it's designed to look very much like a PECS book, as you can tell. I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly. Grace app, another one, great for requesting, and you know, some more things. But let's see what else we have here. ProxTalker, you might be familiar with a Logan ProxTalker, which is a low-tech AAC device. They also have an app, and I think you're starting to get a sense of how some of these are very noun heavy, and that's not bad for some folks. For many folks, though, it's very, very limited. Okay. My Talk Tools is another one. Terrific flexibility in many of these. I've got to give a plug to my alma mater where I did my doctoral work. Speak All is one that has a, both a free and a paid version, and again focuses a lot on requesting. Not exclusively in these apps. I don't mean to imply that, but they are used often for building requesting skills. So let's kind of look beyond that, and I'll introduce you to some more. So these are called Fat Cat Chat apps. They have a series of them, a couple dozen actually, and they're very inexpensive, and they are geared for a specific purpose. So I've shown you 3 here in these screenshots. The one to the left is just for Halloween and trick-or-treating. Right? There are others for very different purposes. So these might be, for speaking kids, let's say, who find trick-or-treating or birthday parties or events like that to be very stressful. And they need a little AAC support in those experiences. And so a very inexpensive AAC app like this might be just the ticket to help them cope with that situation. All right, now let's look at some that allow for more complex language that will permit us to do more than focus on choice making or other single purpose. I want you to know about Sounding Board. You might know AbleNet is a well-established assistive technology company. They have a free app called Sounding Board. Very flexible. You're creating a lot of it from scratch, but it also has a lot of capabilities. So it's one to check out. Alexicom AAC is another one to take a look at. They have a huge variety of these. You can buy either versions for boys or for girls, but for all different ages, from preschool to school age to teen, and so forth. And an SLP developed this, and it not only has many versions, but they have versions for both the iOS and the Android platform. And so that might be important. Another one is So Much to Say. I'm going to speed up here. Talk, Rocket, Go, another one. Just looking at the time here. So we're going to move a little more quickly. Go Talk Now is one of those apps that has its basic portion. Then you can purchase in-app purchases to get other vocabulary and page sets. Tap to Talk you may already be familiar with. Tap Speak Choice. And again, these grid displays, probably very familiar to you. They're just in app form now. Expressive, one by Smarty Ears. Nikki Talk, and then there's also Nikki Talk and Tweet if you have somebody who's really into social media and needs to tweet what they're saying. And Acorn. Acorn has a very different layout, doesn't it? than the other kinds. It kind of is built on this concept of word trees. So you start in the middle with your first word, and then it predicts, based on what you've said in the past, what word you might say next. And if it's there, you touch that one. If not, you touch the plus symbol, and you can go to an area where you can find other words, right? Because we don't say the same thing all the time, but it learns. Another option are visual scene displays, right? So not the grid that we have seen up until now, but using pictures or drawings. It could be two-dimensional, kind of just line drawings, illustrations, and creating hotspots that you touch in order to say particular things. Right? So there are a number of apps that do this and do it well. This particular one is called Seen and Heard. You can kind of see, you know, if you touch the different things, it'll tell you what you're supposed to do with them, but you could change that to mean to say anything you want. This is another one that falls in that category, Scene Speak, the same kind of a thing. So you can record in a sentence or individual words. Chattable is a terrific one, also one of the most recent ones that does scene displays, and it combines those with other kinds of more traditional grid-based vocabulary, right? So you can hit these hotspots to talk about the grocery store, but then also go to your fruit or drinks or whatever folder, you know, you've put on there to have a more grid-based display. All right, lots and lots of apps that will allow us to do generative language. Proloquo to Go is the first on the market, so it is very, very popular for that reason, and lots of you already know about it and probably use it. Others, TouchChat is another terrific one for core language and allowing you to speak in grammatically correct sentences and go in that direction. It has different in-app purchases. The one that you see here is for word power, and you may know that from traditional AAC devices. This one is with the in-app purchase for Gateway, again, which you may know from traditional AAC devices. Avaz is another one, and that is specifically developed for individuals with autism. It has fantastic features. One of my favorites as a clinician is that it automatically, you know, tracks some of your therapy data as you're using it. SpeechTree is a great one because it also has therapy lessons for home programming and home practice in there. Sonoflex, another one from a traditional AAC company, can be used on an app version. Another terrific one for generative language is Speak for Yourself. And one of the things I most love about this particular app is that it's very, very easy to simplify it and then restore it to a complex version. So on the left, you see its full version, and it probably will take me between 60 and 90 seconds to turn it into the version that looks like what you see at the bottom, right? And then probably 15 seconds to get me back to increasing the vocabulary. So it's terrific to increase complexity on the fly. LAMP Words for Life, a terrific one, and some of you attended the LAMP training that was here in recent years. Compass, a Dynavox product that has been very, very well received. And again, there are over 200 AAC apps. So the process of selecting those apps is, you know, very, very challenging. It requires us to have a good handle on the different things that our students can do so that we can create a good fit between what it is they need and what that app has to offer. So for example, if I need somebody, let me go back here for a second, if I need somebody to start with basic requesting, but I know that I am going to be able to get them to more complex language in, you know, let's say the next 8 months, 18 months, then I want to go with an app that will permit that growth, right? So here's an example of that kind of thing. Now, in the beginning, it may only be appropriate for this child to have that version that's, you know, down below, right? That only has fewer than, I don't know, maybe a dozen images. Now, every time they touch an image, it might say that thing and take them to another place. So if it touches the Eat button, it might take you to the eat page with lots of verbs that go with eat, right, and lots of food choices that go with eat. But if that version has, I don't know, 50 pictures on it, within less than 2 minutes, I can change it to show only the number of pictures I think is appropriate for that individual. And then in my therapy, as their skills grow, I can gradually reveal more. And that's a much better option than starting with the screen that only has these 15 symbols on it to begin with, and when they're ready for more, then I have to redesign it to make room for the next set of symbols and words that we are going to be using. So it's much better to start with the end in sight, the way that I'm sort of demonstrating here. Okay, lots and lots of AAC apps. They are all good for different people who have different needs. And if you are a believer that each of these kids is an individual and has different skills, and that if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism, the feature match process is a really good one for you to be aware of. Now, a couple of closing thoughts. One is that unlike traditional AAC devices, a lot of these apps were developed by people who had little to no knowledge of language development. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that they're a bad app, right? But it does mean that, particularly as SLPs, as clinicians, as educators, we have to evaluate them with a critical eye, right? Because, those folks maybe didn't have the knowledge base of language development, language organization, morphosyntax, and all the rest that you need to really be thinking about in making this decision with your clients. All right, so what are some other final considerations? We talked about the fact that some have free or light options. Most of them are a one-time fee. There are a couple that are more subscription-based, so be aware of that. Some of them will allow you to do some trialing. That makes things a little bit easier. App developers also love when they get feedback from professionals. So if the app doesn't do something you want it to do, or it does it poorly, take 2 minutes and contact them, and they will put it, in most cases, they are very responsive, and they'll put it on their wish list for a further update. Remember that apps don't come with support in the same way that traditional AAC devices do. So if you're used to calling on your device rep to come help you, to provide some training, to go out to your client's house, to be available to you, they don't do that, right? The business model doesn't allow for it. They just don't, they don't make enough money on these apps to provide that level of support. They do have online supports, and I can share more information about that with anyone who's interested. Another thing to be aware of is that these AAC apps sometimes do go on sale, especially in October, which is AAC Awareness Month, right, and April, which is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. Most of these app developers do use social media, so if you are getting invested in one app or another, subscribe to their YouTube channel, follow their Twitter feed, belong to their Facebook groups, and you will get lots and lots of information and support. And finally, just that quick reminder, don't jump into selecting an AAC app without using a systematic process, whether it's the one that I'm suggesting here or one that you've come across that fits your clientele and your approach to clinical reasoning better. So thank you so much for coming. One last note, I want to invite you to join the NSU Card Language Links Facebook group. We do post resources on autism and communication and literacy pretty much daily, and we monitor that frequently, and so if folks have ongoing questions, that's a good place to get them answered. Thank you again, and thank you especially to the folks at CARD who invited me to be here with you today. I appreciate it. I am going to check the messaging area. I don't see that we have any questions from the group, so we will just wait 1 second and see if anybody has some questions. If so, I will answer that before we conclude. So group, if you have questions, this would be a good time to post those in. And it looks like we don't have questions. So thank you, everybody. We will conclude the presentation now. Have a great week. And take good care, everybody. Bye-bye.